r/AskReddit. Children, if I want to talk to your manager parents, what has been your most embarrassing experience? I grew up in a smaller town right on the cusp of its big growth boom. We knew our town had finally made it when we got an Olive Garden. We used to eat there 2 to 3 times a month. My mom and I would always split an entree and my dad would get his own. We knew the rule: if you're splitting an entree and you get more than one of the family style bowls of salad, then you'll get charged an extra $4 for the extra person. Which is fair. 2 entrees come with 2 unlimited salads. Well, one day my dad decides he wanted more salad. Only he wants the additional salad, but the waitress said if she refills the bowl that we will be charged the extra $4. Well, lo and behold, my parents threw the biggest tantrum because only he wanted the additional salad. They demanded to speak to a manager and the manager explained the rule, which we knew, but offered to comp the extra salad just to get my parents to stop yelling, and they did. When our bill came, the manager comped my dad's entree and the additional salad fee. Well, my mom got up, interrupted the manager while he was talking to other guests, and threw the check in his face and asked, "What's this?" She was furious that he comped my dad's meal. He ate the meal, therefore we would like to pay for it. She wouldn't stop raising her voice until she was allowed to pay for the meal, but not the salad. The manager was confused but obliged. When they brought the change, the manager slipped a few free appetizer coupons. My mom ripped them up and threw them on the ground as she left. Safe to say I didn't eat out with them for at least a month, and I still refuse to go to Olive Garden with them. Grocery store had this sign up that said, if an item rang up higher than an advertised price, it was free. It was the 80s and stores did stupid shit like this that I never see in stores today. Mom was buying a box of Little Debbie cakes and they rang up for $2.85 instead of the advertised $2.50. So now mom wants her free cakes. Cashier doesn't know what to do, summons a manager. Manager tells her to ring up the sale otherwise, and he'll be right back. Comes back and hands my mother 35 cents cheerfully and says, "There you go." My mother points out the sign behind him and he says, "Oh, the last manager put that up. It doesn't make any sense. I'm the new manager and I just haven't had the sign removed." Yet it was a printed plastic sign that was screwed into the wall. Mom insists they honor their sign. He says nah. Now, up to this point, as an adult looking back, I'm totally on board with mom's actions. Mom gathers her things, decides against taking the Little Debbies on principle, and we get in the car. Mom wordlessly drives downtown to the main store of this 3 to 5 store chain, knowing the office is next door. We walk into this perfectly 80s wood paneled office, where my mother asks the secretary to speak to the owner of the store, and is permitted to do so, since this is a family owned business and their corporate office is smaller than the row of cubicles my staff occupy at work. Here my mother unleashes a tirade about how she has lost faith in his brand, and how his word is meaningless, since they will not honor the sign, etc. This guy stands up, profusely apologizes, validates her anger, and then pulls out his wallet and hands her a $5 bill along with a promise that he will speak to the manager and the sign will either be honored or removed. We get home and find that the ice cream we bought melted in the trunk because summer and ruined the cereal and the bread. My Mill is truly a Karen. Going out to eat with her is always a nightmare. Her orders have 14 special requests, but she's not at all kind about it. She is defensive from the get-go, like you're an idiot who's already screwed the order up. No dressing. Not on the side. Nothing. Completely dry. Do you understand? I will send it back. The one I will never forget though was dinner at Joe's Crab Shack. In case you've never been, it's one of those places that every so often plays a song that the entire staff is required to drop everything and do a little synchronized dance to. It's quick. Everyone gets a little kick out of it. It's part of the fun. Now my Mill Karen knew this. It's not like she'd never been here. But apparently she was not willing to wait 2 extra minutes for her dry salad, so she starts going off as soon as the dancing starts. She gets a manager who clearly knows Karen well and offers a quick apology for doing their job, a discount and her dry ass salad. But Karen's not completely satisfied. She tells us that, even though dinner for our party of 8 is on her, she's not tipping the waitress 1 penny. She proceeds to bitch, loudly, the rest of the meal, and antagonize our waitress over petty shit. I worked too many years in customer service and yeah no, I'm a decent human being. I made sure to get my bill separate, so I could tip for the entire table. I wrote a quick note on the receipt, something along the lines of way, to stay positive even when the customer's a jerk. I was a little afraid of the wrath of Karen. It was one of my first interactions with her too, but when the waitress came and hugged me, Karen and I locked eyes. She knew. I didn't care. Don't be a cunt, Karen. Not the child, but I think this fits. I had this awful annoying terrible neighbor who, because I'm a giant sucker, I was kind to. She asked me to come with her to dinner because it was her birthday and I knew I was the only person on the planet who would go with her, and gosh darn it, it's her birthday, how could I say no? So she and I went, and we brought our kids, all girls, 1 mine, 2 hers. She makes her oldest do her math homework right there at the table. When the child asks her for help, mind you this is like 3rd grade math, the mom says it's too hard. I end up helping. The waiter is just fine. He comes by and takes our orders. She is already acting weird, but she always acted weird, so I didn't think much of it. Waiter comes by again and asks if we need anything. She dismisses him and waves him off and tells him no. Then like 30 seconds later turns to me and is like, "Can you believe how awful the waiter is? He won't even refill my drink." And just goes on about all these issues that literally don't exist. I'm like, he just asked if you needed anything. She cuts me off. I'm going to talk to the manager. Oh god. She talks to the manager like this is the worst experience she's ever had in the history of her miserable existence. I'm in shock. Her kids have their heads down. Mine is oblivious, lol. The manager gives her like half off the meal. Oh, and the cooker? That's my half, so you only need to pay the rest. Oh gee, thanks. I left a big tip and a note on my receipt telling them the waiter was great and apologizing for the complaints that were totally not warranted. It was the second most embarrassing restaurant experience of my life. Well, so, what's the first most? When my daughter was young, like 1 year old, I was out to dinner with my family and, then, husband. Normally she was super well behaved, but for some reason she started to cry. And she wouldn't stop. I tried to soothe her, but it wasn't working. I told my husband she needed to be taken outside, but he refused, because the food was being served. So already I'm embarrassed, because now I'm that mom with the crying kid ruining the restaurant for everyone. Plus this is right in front of my family, especially my dad who I look up to, and try to model as a parent. I couldn't just up and grab her in that moment, because the food really was being served, and I would have knocked down a waiter. But as the waiters left, my husband suddenly slammed his hand over our daughter's mouth and nose, and rumbled at her through gritted teeth to shut up. His arm was super tense, as was his voice, and it was like he was doing all he could to not crush her head like a grape. My eyes went wide. I grabbed her and took her outside. Never did find out what was wrong with her, since she was fed, clean, and all that. But I did see a dark side of my husband, and so did my father. My husband didn't even come out to relieve me until he had completely finished with his food. She had calmed down by then, though, so I brought her back inside. I didn't want to leave her alone with him anyway. By the time I was able to eat, my own food had gone cold. Super embarrassing and also terrifying. Ugh. Edit. I've gotten several very kind messages about this. Thank you. I want to lay some fears to rest that yes, he is an ex-daughter and I no longer deal with him regularly. I also don't want to give the wrong impression that he was beating us on the regular or anything. While there was a lot of wrong in the relationship, physical abuse was not one of those things. This incident was probably the closest he ever got. Thank you all for the concern and kind words. My grandmother wasn't only a let me talk to your manager type, she was a racist, and advancing dementia completely turned off her filter for that. I've blocked out all the context behind it other than I took her to buy yarn and something went wrong. I think maybe they shorted her a couple bucks or wouldn't honor a coupon or something. Whatever it was ended in a "let me talk to your manager" followed by a tirade to the manager about how they shouldn't be hiring Mexicans. I just remember having to talk over her and say, "Oh my god, you can't talk to her like that. Nothing you just said is okay," followed by me trying to push her wheelchair out of the store as fast as possible with her digging her feet into the ground trying to get me to stop so she could go back to trying to ruin someone's day, and me wondering if I'd go to jail for elder abuse if her ankle snapped in the process, because nothing was going to stop me getting her out of that store. I got her into the car and then went back in and apologized till I was blue in the face. I wish I could say it was an isolated incident, but it definitely wasn't. If by any cosmic chance any sales clerks or phone reps that had to deal with my grandmother read this thread, I'm so incredibly sorry. I apologize on behalf of my whole family, and I'd give you a hug if I could. As an interesting side effect of caring for her, I have a tendency to wander off and pretend to look at things when we get to the register if I'm with someone and I'm not the one paying. I think she gave me an honest to god phobia. Edit. Thanks for the helpful suggestions about pulling the wheelchair backward next time. She passed away 2 years ago, so it's thankfully something I won't have to deal with for a while. I'd never experienced someone digging their heels in before, and I was sort of panicking trying to get her out of the store before she tried anything else. I think under any kind of better circumstances I would've worked it out. Edit 2 bonus story edition. This one thankfully happened at home, but is nevertheless I guess equal parts amusing and equally awful as the other story in hindsight. It was some kind of special occasion, probably one of our birthdays, because we were all sitting at the kitchen table eating cake. The nightly routine was we all sit down to eat dinner, and she'd put the TV on the evening news, which we'd halfway listen to. They were talking about something political and said blah blah blah, and the House Judicial Committee approved this. My grandmother caught that one line and said, "The Judicial Committee? Those damn Jews. What are they doing with all these committees?" I got caught somewhere between wanting to laugh at her misunderstanding and wanting to make some kind of noise of horror, and instead I just inhaled sharply and aspirated a gigantic mouthful of chocolate cake and coughed so hard and so long that my mom wound up having to take me to urgent care because it set off my asthma. Good times y'all, good times. My mom used to run restaurants. My stepfather used to be a chef in high-end restaurants and is the kind of guy who expects to be treated better than he is currently being treated, regardless of whatever that treatment is. They are not fun to go out to eat with. The most embarrassing experience is actually their most embarrassing experience, one where I embarrassed them. My wife and I pride ourselves on being a relief table when we go out to eat. Both of us have been servers, and there's always the counterpoint to the difficult table. That's us. Barring horrible service or bad food, we are super easy customers, tip well, and try to have a good time with our server. Furthermore, we just treat people nicely. So you can imagine our disdain when my parents act like they're fucking royalty at a dinner service. My wife and I went out to dinner with them. They were being particularly tough. My mom was acting like she was Gordon Ramsay analyzing the business, critiquing everything down to the amount of bubbles in her seltzer. Looks like it's time to change the code too. My stepdad was getting more and more heated over stupid things like the amount of ice in his drink and how the waitress didn't top off his water that he was barely sipping on fast enough. It came to a head when my stepfather ordered a steak medium well. It came back medium well, and for some reason he changed his mind that he wanted it medium rare while it was cooking, and they didn't read his mind, so he gave attitude, as did my mom. They jumped really quickly to demanding free stuff. I'm an adult and this may be the first time they realize this. I interrupted in front of the server and said something like, "Really? This is what you're doing? That's what you ordered?" I turned to the server and said, "We do not need anything comped." I then pulled out my wallet and handed her my card and said, "This is for the bill. We'll happily wrap up with what we have here. I'm very sorry for their behavior. You're doing great." Then the line that stung them so deep they still bring it up years later. I was taught to treat people nicely, a lesson that seems to be forgotten. Thank you. They turned red. The server walked away. I looked down and cut my steak and didn't say a word. They were so flabbergasted that the meal was virtually silent, except me asking my stepfather how his steak was a few minutes later. I signed the check, gave a big tip, and we walked out and said goodbyes. They've been nicer to servers each time that we've gone out since. Edit. Wow. First gold. Thanks. Okay, so we were going to a theme park in the capital of the country. I must have been around 19, which makes my one sister 16, and the youngest around 9. My dad had been planning this for a year, and we were psyched to go. After you go into this place, you see a huge lake, and on each side there are several shops. A restaurant there, a souvenir shop there, and also, there is a Build-A-Bear shop. This shop is not a part of the park itself, but it does have an entrance from the park. Anyway, my dad didn't have custody of my sister at the time, and only saw her very sporadically. This was by his own choice, since his anxiety meant he couldn't care for her properly. She lived with a foster family. This was one of maybe 3 times a year he got to actually take her somewhere, so this trip was a big deal. He told her she could have one thing from the park, whatever she wanted he would pay for it. And, being a 9-year-old girl, she said she wanted a Build-A-Bear. My dad was unfamiliar with the concept of Build-A-Bear, so he didn't know that the price of the bear isn't the total price. On top of it comes the clothes, the shoes, etc. So the shop person takes my sister through the whole thing. You know, stuffing, putting the heart in etc. and rings up the total. My dad totally lost it. Like, red in the head, screaming at this poor girl in the shop lost it. And I felt so embarrassed. Firstly, this girl didn't make the prices. Secondly, this was the trip of the year. It was all 4 of us for the first time in forever. And thirdly, you don't yell at people like that. I get that he was angry, since he didn't know the process, and felt cheated. And also, he felt backed into a corner, since he had promised my sister that she could have anything. But you don't do that. Ever. Luckily, the rest of the trip went by without a hitch, and my youngest sister doesn't remember this happening. She has 2 Build-A-Bears now, and she named each of them after one of her sisters. This is a weird story that had a huge impact on me, and about a parent talking to the manager, but is a little different. Growing up, my dad was sheriff of a small town. I must have been around 8 to 9. He was brought in after the previous sheriff was booted out for political reasons / stealing city funds. That was a really unpopular movie, since he was super popular and spread his money all over town and let people get away with murder. That sheriff was out, and my dad was brought in. Everybody hated him, in part because they loved the old sheriff, and also because my dad was an outsider. Even though he came from about 2 towns over, he wasn't of their world, so he could never be fit to see over the village. It didn't help that my dad was a raging asshole with a stick up his butt for the rules. One day, my dad was dressed in his full uniform and took me alone to the local corner diner. Like, one of those places straight out of Roadhouse. We sat down and ate the full dinner, and my dad lectured me something about respect and the rules are all we have. Then the waitress came in and dropped the check. My dad looked at it, and it said the meal was free. My dad then excused himself and went up to the waitress. I kept to myself and doodled on the napkin, and the next time I looked up, my dad was full on screaming at the woman. He was straight up shaking. She tried to explain that free meals is how all cops are treated in this town, and my dad was furious that he would get special treatment, that police are put above the normal laws, that the police have rules they must follow, and not accepting kickbacks is one of those rules, and that it especially happened in front of his kid, who he's trying to teach right. Everyone in the diner was quiet and just staring at him. It was a weird situation, because it was a moment where my dad showed a lot of integrity, but also a story of a 6 feet 7 inch man with a gun on his belt screaming at a tiny little waitress. It stuck in my head as a clear picture of the contradictions that our parents are. Like, a lot of the good comes from them, but at the same time a lot of the bad. Edit. This kind of blew up more than I was expecting. So I would like to promote not being an asshole cop who beats your kids. Edit. Quit sending messages telling me how shitty my dad was. He's not a hero and did some really shitty things in his life, but I'm still his son and it's not fun to hear from a bunch of strangers tell me how my dad sucks. You didn't know him. You don't know his full story. You just know a slice of life told by one person. The point of this story is that people are complicated and that we are full of contradictions. It's not to give yourself another excuse to feel good about yourself on the internet. He was a guy who beat me and my brother, had anger issues, was painfully insecure and closed off, but also was a noteworthy cop. He rose through the ranks, and as a white man, brought progressive racial policies to his department in the 1980s that to this day are still radical. He was an innovator as a police administrator. I'll put it like this. He did heartbreaking things to me, and yet I found room to forgive him. Through a long and painful process, I found room to forgive him as an adult. Not excuse his behavior, but put peace in my heart towards my feelings towards him. Whatever opinion you have of him, keep in mind that from your computer, it is one that is really easy for you to have, and for me it is, and will always be a really difficult one for me to have. Not long ago my mom asked to treat my wife and I to lunch at Outback Steakhouse. We get there and order. My mom orders iced tea with extra lemon. Tea shows up with 1 lemon. Usually no big deal, right? Just ask for more. Well, instead of doing that my mom turns to the waiter and says what? No extra lemon. You fail as a waiter. No brownie points for you. The dude sits there for a moment and then says rather flatly I'll be right back with more lemon. I turn to my mom and am like, that's how you get your food spit in. You've just sent the message that this will be a shitty tipping table and he's going to totally focus elsewhere. She argues that well it should have inspired him to work harder to impress us. I think from that point I just mentioned that from his end, his odds of making money are now higher at some other table. It's just how people work. Well, she goes to the bathroom and cries. She comes back and makes some super complicated order. I texted my wife who was sitting right next to me and say this dude is going to butcher that order on purpose. Food comes out. Ours is correct and perfect. Hers is all fucked up. Basically a totally wrong order. She asks for it to be fixed, a bit more subdued this time. It comes out technically correct, but obviously carelessly prepared / cooked. I chuckle inside. Here's the insane part. After all of this, she turns to us and says I was right about that waiter. He sucks at his job. It's like no, dude, your behavior made him not give a fuck about you. After being a total asshole and paying the price she walked away feeling validated and haughty. I slipped in a nice tip with a sorry for my mom note. My mother and I had to get new military dependent IDs when my dad retired. We made an appointment at the ID office and we were stopped at the gate because our current IDs were no longer valid. Mother tries to yell at the poor Marine just doing his job, expecting to get an exception and be let through. No dice. This is a super strict base, so we are sent to get temporary passes. They have to confirm our identity and it takes almost an hour. My mother is fuming by this point because no one in the office is giving her a special exception either. No manager available, and no one is willing to hurry the process. We arrive 25 minutes late for our appointment to a full waiting area. The only lady there, who is running the front desk and all the stations, lets her know that being more than 15 minutes late forfeits the appointment slot, and the next available time is about an hour and a half. My mother starts to have a meltdown in front of a room full of people and I just stand there mortified. A waiting room full of military men is watching her scream and almost cry. She gives the lady an earful, and the woman decides to let us get our IDs next, because my mom is making such a scene. My mother is smiling at this point, thinking that she has finally won. Lady starts processing us, and come to find out my father had not done all of the paperwork. Mother starts demanding an exception, and that the lady give us a break. She explains that she can't, and my mother storms off. I give the lady a quick sorry and scurry on after. We return the next day and the same lady is running the office. The tension was palpable and I was so embarrassed and uncomfortable. I could tell the woman was taking her time to make my mother squirm, but mother couldn't have another meltdown and risk having to come back another day, so she was just fuming. My mother still doesn't know that my father called and apologized to the woman after. I wish she would figure out that people are more likely to help if you're nice. One time my granddad got a sausage roll at a football match during halftime. When he got back to his seat he found it was overdone. The pastry was quite burned. The man was irate. He didn't take it back straight away as the second half was about to start, but he spent much of the second half angrily lamenting his savory snack letdown. So he takes it home, calls the customer service number on the back. I assume he had a few choice words for the poor soul on the other end, but I wasn't present for this, and keeps the remainder of the sausage roll in the freezer for the next couple of weeks. Skip ahead to the next match day. My granddad tells me we are heading out early so he can have his sausage roll replaced. The customer service line told him to go to kiosk 3 at the front of the ground next to the ticket office. When we arrive, however, the shutters are down at the food place. The old man looks around growling and turning red in the face, stamps right over to window number 3 of the ticket office and slams his frozen burned sausage roll down like a fucking flaky gauntlet. At this point I'm trying to convince him the ticket office was a completely different department to the catering concession, but my granddad was having none of it. The lady working the ticket window continually attempted in vain to convince him the same. They sell match tickets, not hot snacks, but this just got him angrier and angrier. Across comes a colleague behind the glass. Now there's just 2 people to rage at. Then a head steward comes to attempt to defuse the situation and my granddad begins to wave the burnt sausage roll in this man's face. I was actually surprised he didn't whack him with it. At this point I'm mortified by the whole affair, wishing I'd have stayed back at the house until nearer kickoff. Eventually, after an hour or so, the shutters come up on the food concession. Fella at the counter goes, "You must be Mr. Alaginge," and calmly resolves the situation, dispatching a freshly baked sausage roll with the steady hands of a surgeon. My granddad is completely satisfied with the result of his hour of insolent rage. As we are walking away he turns to me and says, "That's how you get these things sorted." Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.